Hello, this is Katie Butts-Dehm, your biology instructor. Today we're going to look at Plant Science Audio Lecture 3, which is Plants and Their Environments. So there are 4 things that plants need just to simply survive: light, air, water, and nutrients. And the first letter of each of these words spells out lawn. And your lawn is covered with plants. Hopefully they're surviving. There are 7 things that plants need to grow, not only just to survive, but to grow: light, air, water, and nutrients, so lawn, and then the right temperature, room to grow, and time. And I'm sure there's a lot of other things we could come up with for this list. Plants grow almost everywhere. A habitat is the area and resources used by a particular species. So it is the home of that species. Now, a lot of people will think of animals as having a habitat or a home because they can move around and then they go home. But plants are also living organisms, so they also have a home or habitat. The habitat includes all the living and non-living things in the surrounding environment. An organism's habitat meets all the environmental conditions that organism needs to survive. So for plants, that's going to be light, air, water, and nutrients. Lawn, right? Most habitats are defined by the plants that grow there. So we'll be looking at habitats and you'll see the plants. There will be certain plants that grow there, and that's going to be based on the plants that can survive will be based on things like temperature, and you'll look at how far they are from the equator, things like that. A forest is a large area covered with trees, and there are several different types of forest. A temperate forest is a broadleaf forest, and they are dominated by deciduous trees. In Maine, we are in a temperate zone. There's lots of deciduous trees, as you can see in the fall. We also have lots of coniferous trees as well, but we're dominated by the deciduous trees. Temperate forests have 4 well-defined seasons. The temperature ranges from negative 22 Fahrenheit to 86 degrees Fahrenheit. And I know there's a bigger range of that here in Maine. When I came here like 25 years ago, the first day I was here, it was 100 degrees. That's not normal for Maine, but it does happen. And I've been here when it's colder than negative 22. But this is a normal temperature range. There are high levels of precipitation and high humidity. The location of temperate forest locations are North America, Northeast Asia, and Western and Central Europe. And they are between 25 and 50 degrees latitude on both hemispheres. So the plants in deciduous forests, now they have other plants besides just trees, but for the dominant plants, remember this, deciduous trees. So maples, oaks, elms, birch, and aspens. And here we have birch, a lot of paper birch here, a lot of maples and elms, but not really a lot of aspens here. So the trees form a canopy, and the canopy shades the plants below. So you can see, here's the canopy from the trees, and then there's plants below in the shade. So some major plant adaptations of deciduous trees in the temperate forest are they have broad leaves to capture sunlight. Now you may look at this leaf and you might think, well, that's not really so broad, but compare it to a pine needle and it is very broad. Also, deciduous trees shed their leaves in the winter. Now if you think about it, during the summer, it's starting to get light at 5 a.m. and then it's getting dark close to 9. So there is a lot of sunlight, and it's worth it for these trees to have their leaves. You know, they do a lot of photosynthesis, but during the winter here, it gets dark at 4. So it's really not worth the plants to waste their energy producing, or the deciduous trees, to waste their energy making chlorophyll in the winter when they only have a few hours of sunlight. so the leaves are all dropped. I know that we haven't gone through animals yet in class, but we are going to talk a little bit about animals in these habitats because there are different ones. And keep in mind also, there's no big giant fence keeping the plants in one area and the animals in one area. So you'll see them moving around in different areas. But so for example, in temperate forest, you'll see things like owls, turkeys, hawks, blue jays, squirrels, earthworms, insects, frogs, snakes, mountain lions, bobcats, and black bears. So there's lots more. You know, I can think of the porcupines we have here, and what is it? Lots of skunks, things like that. Just think of the animals you see. It seems like every time I drive down the highway, then there's some turkeys off on the side. So animal adaptations. Many animals hibernate or migrate away during the winter. So that's pretty important because it does get cold here. And then some animals store food. So here are some typical animals of the temperate deciduous forest, and you may have seen some of these. I bet everyone here has seen chipmunks and raccoons, woodpeckers. You know, I don't often see wolves running around here, but I see a lot of foxes. And there's bears and moose, things like that, deer. So our next habitat to look at are the boreal forest or taigas. I really like the name boreal forest better because it reminds me of a fairy tale, something like that. But you can call them either one, it's the same thing. These are very cold forests in the subarctic region that are dominated by coniferous trees. So remember, I just told you, I think in the last 2 slides ago, that there's no fence keeping certain trees out. So we have coniferous trees, and there are coniferous trees that are lower, and then deciduous trees, you may have some that move up there as well. But the boreal forests are colder forests, and they're dominated by coniferous trees. They have long, cold winters that are the temperatures between -65 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So they have moderate to high precipitation, and they're located just south of the Arctic Circle in Canada, Russia, Scandinavia, China, Mongolia, and northern Japan. The plants are evergreens such as spruce, fir, and pine, and also the deciduous larch. But here they are, so that's strange. There's a deciduous tree up there that's a larch, but here they are. Plant adaptation. The trees have a cone shape, so they're pointed on top, and you can see the point here, and then they are like a cone. This way snow will slide off more easily. And then also the trees have needle-like leaves, and this prevents water loss. The animals include deer, wolves, lynx, fox, chipmunks, and bats. A lot more animals you can see, bears and owls and everything else. Animal adaptations, they have hibernation or migration. Because it might get really, really cold. So it does get really, really cold. So they're going to leave. And then they have thick fur. So our third type of forest is a tropical rainforest. And tropical rainforests are broadleaf evergreen forest. So when we think of evergreens here, we think of the pine trees and all the trees that aren't deciduous leaves. So they're usually a lot of coniferous trees. But the trees in the rainforest also stay green all year long, so they are called evergreens. And these are located between the equator and the 2 tropics, the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, in Southeast Asia and South America. So you can see them right here, and there's even some here, and here's some in Africa. Tall, broad-leaved evergreen trees are the dominant plants in the tropical rainforest. The trees form a canopy over the forest below. So you can see here's a canopy layer, here's an emergent layer that's going above the canopy layer, and then all of this is shaded. So the canopy, the trees that provide the canopy, they provide shelter and shade below. The temperature range is 68 degrees Fahrenheit to 77 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's not a huge temperature range. And they have heavy rainfall, which 79 to 394 inches a year, so nearly 400 inches a year. That is a lot of rain. And here's a rainforest, tropical rainforest. Plants include palm trees, banana trees, rubber trees, cassava trees, bamboo, orchids, vines, mosses, and ferns. And I mentioned before that I grew up in Texas, the Houston area, and my mother had a banana tree. And in Houston, it's very humid. There's a lot of rainfall. It stays pretty warm most of the year, but in the winter it can get cold. It took about maybe 10 years to get some bananas for my mother's tree, and they were just like very small bananas and just a few of them. So plant adaptations in the tropical rainforest include, let's see, plants at lower levels have very large leaves to absorb more light because remember they're shaded and there's lots of shade. So they have to have very broad leaves. I feel like we just did this. We did right up here, the plants. So you've just seen these, they're right up here. The animals include bats, gorillas, monkeys, sloths, macaws, amphibians, reptiles, and insects. Seems like most places you have amphibians, reptiles, and insects, but there's different kinds of each of these. Here are some animals of the rainforest. So our next habitat is grasslands. Grasslands have grasses as the dominant plant, the naturally dominant plant. So that pretty much grasslands, grasses. The temperature range is negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit to over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So it can get pretty hot, it can get pretty cold. But if you look at the annual rainfall, there's only 10 to 40 inches. Now, if you remember, the tropical rainforest had like 79 to 394, so close to from 100 to 400 inches. Way more rain than the grassland. So with the grassland, there's just not enough rain to support a forest, to support those huge, huge plants. There's not enough rain, but there's more rain than you would find in a desert. Grasslands have very fertile soil. So the dominant plants, grasses, and wildflowers such as purple, I thought that was purple nettle grass, milkweed and yarrow. Plants have flexible stems that bend instead of breaking in strong winds. So if you get a grassy area and you get strong winds, you'll see the grass just sort of blowing and it doesn't break. Grasses have very strong roots to prevent the plants from being uprooted by the winds. They have narrow leaves, and this prevents water loss. And remember, that's important because grasslands don't get a whole lot of rain. They also have very deep roots to absorb more water. Animals in the grasslands include giraffes, deer, zebra, lions, elephants, and antelopes. Now, you know, that's a lot of these you don't see in the grasslands in the US, like no giraffes running around and zebras and lions and elephants, but we do have deer and antelope and things like that. Look at this one. You can hardly see that lion head at all because it matches with the grass so well. Same thing with these deer. I mean, you can see them, but they're camouflaged pretty good. So here are some grassland animals, and you'll see there's a lot of them that aren't here, but there's some that are here in the US. Well, armadillos, we had those in Texas, but different types of birds. You know, if you think of falcons, but hawks, things like that. A lot of birds there and deer. And then if you look, certainly here we don't have the hyenas and cheetahs running around. Oh, but there's some bison that you can see those running around. A desert is a barren area of land with little rainfall and scarce vegetation. So they have less rainfall than any of the other habitats. Cacti and succulents are the dominant plants, and deserts may be extremely hot or extremely cold. But the main thing they have in common is less than 10 inches of rain per year. So very little rainfall. Everything that lives in a desert has to conserve water. So a hot desert can be over 100 degrees Fahrenheit during the day and an average of 25 degrees at night. So that is really, really cold. And then a cold desert, it'll be about 28 degrees in Fahrenheit in winter, so below freezing, and 78 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer. So here are some deserts, and we have some cold deserts. There may be a lot of ice, but it's all frozen. They're not necessarily getting a lot of rainfall. And then here's some hot deserts. I haven't been to a lot of these, really. I've only been to this one. And then some coastal deserts, which those are hard to see. It looks like there's some around there. Oh, they're easier to see on this larger screen. I have another screen off to the other side. The dominant plants are cacti, succulents, flowering bushes, desert trees, very small ones, small shrubs, and grasses. Plant modifications include, and there's a lot of plant modifications here. So the leaves are spines. The spines you see on cacti are actually the leaves. And the reason that they are so skinny is to minimize water loss. So they're not going to be broad like in a temperate forest. Green stems can undergo photosynthesis. So the leaves are so tiny and spiny that your stem, if it's green, may undergo photosynthesis too. A lot of the plants have fleshy stems that store water, so water in there. And then they have a waxy coating or cuticle to prevent water loss. That helps retain water. Animals include camels, kangaroo rats, reptiles. Oh, that looks like a fennec fox. The animal adaptations, they have thick skin to prevent water loss, so you'll notice that with a lot of the reptiles. They have the capacity to store food and water, so think of a camel. Most of the small animals live in burrows to protect them from temperature fluctuations. And reptiles actually get most of the water through their food, and they lose very little water through their skin. So here's some desert animals that you might see. See, I'm thinking the golden eagle, and you'll also see eagles other places. But different certain desert cottontails. Look how the ears are so short on this little rabbit. And bigger ears, they would lose more water. There's a coyote. I've never seen a sand cat. But lots of these. There's scorpions. When I think of the desert, I went to lots of scorpions and snakes, and there were things like bats there too. A tundra, our next habitat, tundras. A tundra is a treeless region found in the Arctic and on top of mountains where the climate is cold and windy and rainfall is scant. So you can have a lot of tundras here that have the same conditions like tundras. They don't have trees. You can also have them on the mountaintops. For example, I took a class in Wyoming called Arctic Alpine Ecology, And we would go up to the top of this mountain where conditions were a lot different. And you could be standing in the valley where the town was, and there would be rain, and you could look up to the mountaintop and see that it would be snowing there. And it was in the middle of summer. So they can be scattered throughout, things with the same condition or similar conditions. So permafrost, you'll find permafrost in tundras. And permafrost, think of it, permanent frost. This is a thick subsurface layer of soil, so it's below the top of the soil, and it remains frozen throughout the entire year. So regions just below the ice caps of the Arctic, extending across North America to Europe and Siberia and Asia, are going to be tundra with permafrost. Also, much of Alaska and half of Canada about half of Canada are in the tundra biome. Tundra is also found at the very top of high mountains elsewhere in the world. Temperature range here, -40 degrees Fahrenheit to 64, and the annual precipitation is 6 to 10 inches. That is not a lot of rain when you compare it to a rainforest or any forest. So here's some pictures of the tundra animals, and tundra plants, very small plants. So plants include mosses, lichens, Arctic poppies, Arctic willows, bearberry, Labrador tea, just little things like that, little plants. And here's some tundra plant adaptations. The plants are short and smaller because the soil does not have a lot of nutrients. But being small, these plants are more protected from the wind, being small and close to the soil. They can absorb heat from the soil, and they lose less heat because they're all down compact by the soil. The plants have darker leaves, and that helps them absorb more heat. So I don't know if you ever notice, if you have a white car, it stays cooler because it reflects a lot of the heat. If you have a black car or darker car, then it'll get hot really quick because it absorbs a lot of the heat. Plants do the same thing. Pretty much everything does. Tundra plants have small, waxy leaves to prevent water loss. They have hairs on the stems to trap heat near the plants. So just like fur and hair on people can trap heat, then this is sort of like that. A lot of hairs on the stems to keep the heat next to them. These tundra plants grow in clumps, and this helps protect them from the wind. And I'm sure it helps them keep a little warm. Now, this is sort of neat. I had never realized this before, but tundra plants have cup-shaped flowers. And what that does is it reflects the sunlight to the center. And insect pollinators will then be attracted so they can go to the center of the flower so they can go warm up. So they'll go to the cup-shaped flower, sit there, be protected from the wind, be where the reflected sunlight is, and they'll warm up. Meanwhile, they're transferring pollen from plant to plant. And again, they're not doing that purposely. They just get pollen on their feet at one plant and maybe on their belly. Then they go to another plant and bring that pollen with them. So animals include caribou, lemmings, the Arctic fox, Arctic hare, snowy owl, muskox, and polar bear. So, and again, lots of other animals in the tundra, but there are no reptiles or amphibians in the tundra. And if you think about that, reptiles and amphibians are both cold-blooded, okay? So they're ectothermic, meaning they have the same temperature as their surroundings. So they would be frozen for a lot of the year. So animal adaptation. Some animals hibernate or migrate away for the winter. They have small ears and tails to minimize heat loss. They can have padded feet to help them walk in snow, and they usually have thick fur or fat and or feathers. So they may have all of it. Well, they're not going to have fur and feathers, but they may have fat and thick fur or fat and feathers. That will help keep them warm. Here are some tundra animals. So seals, polar bears, whales, beluga whales. The red fox seems to be everywhere. But you can look around penguins and elks and all kinds of different harbor seals. So we see harbor seals in Bar Harbor in Maine off the coast. Penguins, walruses, tundra swans, which they can move around. Snowy owls can be several places. Same with bald eagles. We have a lot of bald eagles here in Maine, and but we're not the tundra. So these animals aren't trapped in one area. They can move around. But you really don't see any polar bears, anywhere else that I've known. So there's also aquatic habitats, and there's several different kinds. Aquatic habitats are just bodies of water. So for aquatic plant adaptations, a lot of plants may have long, narrow stems, and this prevents the plants from being carried away by the currents. Because if you had like a wider stem, then the water would sweep it better, Some stems have air chambers for floating. And any of you, if you go to the coast of Maine and you look usually by the rocks in the water, then you'll see some seaweed that has air chambers for floating. Some leaves have a waxy coating to prevent rotting. Certainly not the flowers that I got for the, I got some flowers for the experiment we did, the plant anatomy activity, and they did not have a coating to prevent them from rotting because they got pretty gross and then fungus in there too in their water after a week or so. So aquatic animal adaptations include webbed feet, gills, streamlined bodies, and fins. And they all don't have this, okay? You have, fins on a fish and webbed feet on a duck and some other mammals and such, but they can have a lot of these, or several of these. So if you looked webbed feet, you have your frogs and your ducks, and then gills, your fish and octopi or octopuses, and here's some blowholes and some aquatic mammals. Here's some moist skin and amphibians, so they actually breathe with lungs and through their skin, and all different types of things that you can see for adaptations. So there's several types of aquatic habitats, and there's more types than this, but I'm just going through these ones. Marine, and marine is just salt water, the oceans and the seas. And of the animals, they are going to have some way to deal with the salt. Then freshwater, so rivers, streams, lakes, and ponds. And then the animals there and the plants are going to have some way to deal with all that, all of the fresh water. So some ways here, the plants and animals to deal with salt water. Some ways here, adaptations to deal with fresh water. Then coastal habitats are where the land meets the sea. And that habitat right where the land meets the sea along the coast, that's going to be a lot different than deep in the ocean, because you have the waves crashing on the surface, you have high tide and then low tide. So there is a lot, they're a lot different. The estuaries. Now estuaries, by the way, Wells Reserve in Wells, Maine, I think it's called Wells Reserve. That's an estuary with a boardwalk, and it has a house with this information packets in it and things like that. But it's a really nice long walk. If you go the whole way, you can walk down to the ocean. But it's a really neat place to go. So estuaries are where the fresh water of rivers mixes with the salt water of oceans. So then these are going to be a lot different, similar because they're aquatic, but also different because they're estuaries. And you have that fresh water pouring into the salt water, and the plants and animals that live there have to deal with those conditions. So it's a lot different than if you go like maybe to Acadia National Park and you look at, by Thunder Hole and all the rocky coast that you'll see, but you're not really looking at a specific area where the river runs into the ocean. So here are some of these different areas that certainly looks like a freshwater pond to me. And then you have here you'll have more of a coastal area. And then here is an estuary where you have your salt water and your freshwater mixing. And then here is your marine area. So here is just a map showing the different habitats. You might have heard them as biomes, and polar and high mountain ice. And then we have the tundra, the coniferous forest, and then we have here, well, here we have desert, and we have temperate grassland. By the way, we didn't really go through savanna, but we have tropical forest, coniferous forest, we did that, and did we look at temperate forest here and here? So right where we are. So this is it for our lecture on plant habitats. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, and have a great day.